they were both 55 years old. And that's younger than your father. They'd worked in the oil field all their life.
Wow.
And that was hard work, I tell you.
So I can ask you about that specifically if you'd like. If you want me to ask you about the oil field.
That'd be all right. I worked that summer, and just
There you go.
And let me ask you another question. Is we were gonna maybe bring up, if we just bring it up right now, you know, with regard to historical events that y'all have lived through, is there a specific one you want me to bring up? Because I think that my mom and I had talked about it. I haven't talked with you about it, but I thought I might ask y'all about the moon landing, what it was like to get to witness the moon landing, and maybe what it was like to experience.
That's crazy.
And maybe what it was like to maybe experience Vietnam, or maybe there would be a better.
the moon landing was something.
We were
that was,
at your great grandmother's house. She was having her 80-something birthday. And
What did you
Travis,
think about-
Jake, Greg was 18 months old, somewhere about that.
you
Yeah.
remember that?
Wait,
better than I do.
did you
They
watch?
had a picture of it.
Did you watch it on TV?
Yeah, black and white.
And
We-
what was
we-
what was
We
what
were,
was the,
we
what
were
was the
great,
feeling?
We were great grannies,
It
weren't
was
we?
very exciting. Yes, we were. She was having a birthday party. 80-something. What year was that? 79? No, it wasn't 79. Might have been 79. Greg was born in 68. No, it wasn't 79.
If he's 18 months, he wasn't. So.
It would be 60.
He was born in 68, so that, yeah, it could
69
have been
and-
69.
It's about halfway through 1969.
But you don't have to use the
No,
date.
you don't have to, but you can find that anywhere. You can look that up anywhere.
Let's see.
And
You know,
I can't button this. Can you button this?
You know what, Travis? We could ask about the moon landing, and then if you want to do Vietnam, or maybe we could ask
Oh,
about.
I mean, they can.
I was pretty oblivious to war when the I mean, he probably wasn't, because he was
Let's go.
exempted from military service during that period because he was studying to be a math and science teacher.
Mm.
And then he was employed as a math and science teacher. So there was a
Is there
divot there.
a historical event that made a big impact on you, though, that you'd like to talk about in the
The
interview?
New London school explosion.
I don't know
Oh,
a thing
yeah,
about
that
except
would be
what I
one of them.
read.
Yeah. Okay.
That's a very
Before
relevant
we
one to
were
our family.
born.
Yeah. So I'll ask
We'll
about
do
that
that one.
specifically. We'll ask about the New London school explosion, and then the moon landing one sounds kind of dumb compared to that one. Is there?
The moon
moon
landing was
landing.
like science fiction.
Yeah.
You know, something you read about. You see these comics about rocket ships landing and aliens coming out. You know. You hear about that as a kid. You read about it in comic strips, but it was actually there, and you could actually see
Mm-hmm.
the film of the video of the man as his foot hits the ground.
Mm-hmm.
It was pretty exciting. We were trying to get home in time to see it on a bigger TV because my grandmother had a black and white, and they had at least a console size color TV. But of course the moon pictures were same, black and white. Both wanted to just see it a little bit bigger.
If you want to start
That was
listing,
when everything was
off.
black and
Oh, it
white.
is.
No, there were color TVs. We had a color TV. But we went back to Mother's house. She had a color TV.
That's amazing.
That's cool. Wait, so then was everybody talking about it that day? So like,
Oh,
was
yeah,
there
it was
like
a
a
big
or
deal.
in there? Because I feel like
Yeah, there was one. Well, I don't know who
Okay,
everybody was
what
feeling or
happened?
not, but I was.
Okay, what happened in 61 or 62 that,
61 or 62.
well, in Lamarck, I remember our science class, we were talking about it. I don't know.
I was teaching.
Yeah.
No, I was not teaching. The children were small. I was at home.
No, not in Lamarck. When we were in Lamarck. I don't know.
And well, I just do
Well,
working.
we'll have a lot of time for you guys to jog your memory. So, Jake, do you want us to get started with the
Sure.
beginning? The
Yeah. If you guys just want to introduce yourselves, that'd be good. And specifically, I think it'd be good if y'all could talk about where you were born and where you've lived throughout your lives.
So you're going to mention that first, right?
He's going chronologically.
That way, whoever watches this in the future knows who you are,
Where you been?
where you been, when you were born.
Okay. Well, we've been lots of places.
Okay.
Okay, perfect.
All right. Let's
Awesome.
Do it.
Okay.
So.
Are you ready to start?
Yep.
Okay.
So where you born and where have you lived?
All right. My name is Mary Jane Teets Gibson, and Jake and Travis Gibson White are our grandsons. I was born in 1940, July 6th, in Kilgore, Texas. My dad was a oil field worker. He was in charge of a small group called a gang with Humble Oil Company. Worked in that his whole life that I remember. He was raised in Louisiana near Caddo Lake. Learned to swim in Caddo Lake. I went to Leverage Chapel schools and also London schools. Graduated from London. High school in 1958. Married Gary Gibson, who also went to London schools. Now you go.
Okay. I was born 1939 in Palestine, Texas, which is East Texas. The hospital I was born in was called the Palestine Sanitarium. And my mom was in the Palestine Sanitarium, which is also the Palestine Hospital now. My mom and dad both were teachers at Centerville High School and elementary school. In fact, my father was the superintendent at the school at the time. And about 3 years later, we moved from there to New London, Texas, which is in East Texas, the East Texas oil field, which is close to Kilgore and also Tyler. My dad taught industrial arts, wood shop in the junior high, and my mother taught elementary, 2nd and 3rd grade for both a long time in New London. Don't know too much more that I need to tell you right now.
Only one thing you missed, Grandpa. Full name.
Full name is Gary Al Gibson. And I was named after, my middle name was after my father.
And let me ask you guys, when is it that you moved to Houston?
Do what, Jacob?
When is it that you moved to Houston?
Well, we actually moved to Lamarck, which is south of Houston. Lived there 3 years. Then moved to Deer Park, which
Okay.
is east of there.
And when was it that you moved to
19.
Lamarck?
When did we move to Deer Park?
To Lamarck.
No. Oh, I thought you were asking when did they move from Lamarck to Deer Park?
Yeah.
1964.
Okay.
Awesome.
All right. And next thing is who are you in this family? And we obviously know that y'all are grandparents and we're your grandsons. But what else? What's your relationship to the other people in this family?
I have no brothers and sisters. I have aunts and uncles. They mostly live in the Kilgore area. And some in the Jefferson area, but mostly in the Kilgore area. My mother has one living brother. He is now 98 years old. He fought in World War II in the Battle of the Bulge. Interesting character. Still mows the grass with the tractor. Can't keep a good man down.
Well, that's amazing. And
It
then the mention of your daughter and son.
Okay, our daughter is Jana Gibson White, and she has 2 boys. Married Danny, married Leslie Daniel White in 1988 in the Deer Park United Methodist Church.
Y'all are great with these dates.
Yeah, I know. Seriously,
I got dates down.
I'm not good. With
I'm not
dates.
gonna have an easy time in this interview.
No, if I did this, I mean, don't get me wrong. I'd be good with naming people, like, but dates, ages, anything like that. I'm not.
But
I'm
that's
not good with.
history.
Mhm.
Do you like history?
I love
Oh, yeah.
history.
Do you like history?
Oh yeah.
You're gonna be good at dates.
Yeah.
You gotta do it.
And then before we move on to Grandpa, as far as your, I guess she covered her mom and dad. Did you cover your grandparents? I can't remember.
No, I didn't. I've told you informally about my grandfather who came from Michigan, left home at age 12 to go to work in the sawmills of Arkansas. Left with his 2 older brothers. Never went back to Michigan that I know of. And why didn't I ask him questions when I was growing up? I don't know.
Well,
I
time was
often
fast.
wonder.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So just leading with that. If we're talking about your grandfather, that makes him our great grandfather.
Right.
Okay. Well, that's awesome.
He was a funny little German man. Wore a size 7 shoe. Very short.
And his last name was Tietz?
Dietz. In fact, he changed his name. He was born Julius Louis Tietz. He changed his name when he left home and became Louis Martin Tietz.
And you
I don't know why. I should have asked.
and you mentioned something about his parents were immigrants. So
His father was born in the United States. My grandfather
Okay.
was born in the United States. But his mother, whichever great that is, came with her mother from Germany in 1857 on a steamship. I don't know which port they arrived at. I just assumed it was Ellis Island. May not have been. I don't know. But they left under her mother's maiden name. So that's why the person in the family who did the genealogy could not find them for years, because they left under the grandmother's maiden name, not her married name. The father must have been in some trouble in Germany.
I wonder if that's why they fled.
It might have been.
It
might have been.
Interesting.
That's awesome.
Yeah, no, that's really cool. Anybody that we're forgetting as far as people that we need to mention on your side?
Oh, we got a lot of characters. He does too.
Oh, I don't doubt it. And then we got to get to Grandpa's side.
He's got characters.
Okay.
Okay.
Well, Grandpa.
Okay, where do we start then?
So
Yeah, just you can talk generally about your place in the family, and then also talk about how far back you can remember your parents, your grandparents, or if we're lucky, great grandparents. You know what I mean? So
and I guess you don't have to mention us or Mom or Uncle Greg because she already covered that.
Okay.
So you can kind of just cover as far back as you can remember.
Okay, in 1939, when I was born, 3 years later, my brother was born. And that's about the time we moved to New London. We both went to school there. We both graduated from London High School, as well as Mary Jane a year later. I graduated in 1957. Mary Jane graduated in 1958. My brother graduated in 1960 from London High School. Mary Jane went on to Sam Houston State Teachers College, and I went on to Texas A&M. But before we got to college, on the senior level, we both went to Kilgore Junior College for 2 years. And After
and-
we graduated,
You and Grandmama went to Kilgore first, or
yes,
You, okay.
went to Kilgore Junior College
And
first.
so did his brother.
And so did my brother. I went on to A&M after 2 years. My brother went on to Sam Houston State Teachers College after 2 years, and that's where Mary Jane was. After we got out of, or graduated from college, we moved to Texas City. Texas City was next to Lamarck. We were teaching in Lamarck at the time, and couldn't find a place in Lamarck to live for several months, and we ended up though probably about 6 months later in Lamarck, where we taught. Let's see, what was the next question?
So he's
Yeah.
covering.
Well, I want to hear more about how you and I want to hear about how y'all met. I want to hear a little bit about how y'all
We
met.
met
that, and then we're
in
gonna.
junior high school.
Mhm.
So y'all met at Kilgore?
No,
no,
we met
we
in
were in the
junior
same
high
high
school.
school.
Okay. Oh.
We were in the same high school.
Same band.
We were both in the band.
It's kind of
I
hard when
was,
you're
when
5
we
foot
met,
tall to be
Mary
large.
Jane was, your grandmother was in the 10th grade, and I was in the 11th grade.
He knew me before then. He just doesn't remember.
Do what now?
I said, you knew me before then.
I beg your pardon, I was a junior when we started dating.
I guess I didn't hear you right then.
And, you were a
I
sophomore.
thought you said you met me.
She thought I was very handsome. And very
Yes, I
And, but anyway, I went on to Kilgore Junior College the next year, where I was president of the student body, president of the freshman class, and also the sophomore class. We were both in the band at Kilgore Junior College. Mary Jane was a clarinet player, very good clarinet player. I played the cornet, and I wasn't very good at all. But that got us 2 scholarships those 2 years we were there before we stepped off to A&M and Sam Houston State. After starting teaching in Lamarck, we were in Lamarck 3 years, and we moved to Deer Park in 1964. And that's when things really started happening, because I was the only one working, and Mary Jane was waiting for our daughter to be born, which was your mother, and then 3 years later, our son was born, Greg. So in Deer Park then, we had both children. Now, Jana was born in Kilgore because we were working on our masters at Stephen F. Austin at the time. And so Mama had to take a summer off because Jana was born in the summertime. And so we had to go back to Stephen F. Austin the 4th summer to finish her masters. And then we returned, of course, to Lamarck and at the end of the summer, and continued our teaching. And well, no, take that back.
Yeah.
I take that back. We did not return to Lamarck. We returned to Deer Park.
And that's where we are now.
And that's where we are now. So.
And let me ask you, kind of a follow up. We understand our kind of contemporary family history, and one of the things we wanna capture as well is what is it that you remember about your parents, you know, and grandparents as well, your grandparents as well, as far back as you can remember. You know, what was anything that struck you about them, or stories about them, or you know, where they lived or where they came from, you know.
And if you can remember their names too.
Okay.
You want me to be first?
She mentioned some of it. Grandpa, we have not gotten any of your parents or grandparents.
Okay, I was okay. The my mother was from Grapeland, Texas, Grapeland, Texas was famous for watermelons and peanuts growing, and they lived way out in the country. One thing I remember about my mom's family was that they lived so far out in the country, the telephone at that time did not work unless you could ring it, and you would ring at their house. They
Manually.
would ring a box which had a little transformer type thing in it, which would send a signal to the next house some way away, and those people would have to ring it to get the signal all the way to town.
Wow.
And so they were way out in the country.
Complicated.
Now, my grandparents were Webb and Annie Finch, and they were foreign people until they moved into Grapeland, and they ran a store in Grapeland. My grandfather did, kind of a warehouse, not a warehouse, but kind of a hardware store. So, and he ran that for a good while.
Were they from Texas or were they from somewhere
As far
else?
as I know,
They were from Texas.
They were raised in the area. Grapeland was 20 miles from Palestine, where I was born. Now, my dad is from Palestine. They lived about 8 miles east of Palestine, and same thing with him, as far as I know. My father was born in the Palestine area, probably at home, not in the hospital. And I imagine most people were born at that time at home. I do not know my grandparents very well. Didn't see them much because back then, in that time, in the 30s and 40s, you didn't travel much. And so we got to visit every now and then. So I don't know my grandpa and grandma Gibson very well. And before I was in junior high, my grandmother died, so I know very little of her. My grandfather I knew more about, but he passed away several years later, so I do not know much about either one of them.
What was the best mode of travel then? Was it still car or was it train or?
We had yes, it was locally the car. The main car I remember was a Studebaker, a 1940 some odd Studebaker, and then we bought my father bought a new car, a 1950 Plymouth, and that was our main car, and 4-door. Mary Jane, I think her family had a 4-door Ford most of the time.
No,
And you had the soda,
I had a DeSoto.
a DeSoto before that. I don't know what model that was.
50.
But the reason that my mother probably and dad went to college at Sam Houston State was Palestine and Grapeland were on the railroad line. So the railroad came through Palestine, which was a big railroad town. And I don't know this, but I would think probably my father rode the train to Huntsville, and I know my mom did. In fact, we still have, y'all have my mother's trunk that she always carried.
Oh, that's right.
Yes.
Yeah.
They'd pack
All
up
her
the
stuff
trunk,
for
and the trunk
college.
would go on the train, and the train would go from Grapeland to Huntsville, which was probably about 80 miles or so.
Something like that.
I'm not sure, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I also want to ask, kind of going along with what we were talking about before. We talked about with Grandmama that we know we have some German heritage that came directly from Germany, and as far as we know, we really are Texan on Grandpa's side. And I wanted to kind of talk about that in any more detail that we can. It sounds like we know we have some German. What about any other relatives? Do you know any other relatives of different ethnicity or anything like that?
I don't. I think my grandfather lived. He was in Arkansas, and then he moved with the oil field thing to Louisiana. My grandmother's family is from Louisiana, so one of my great grandfathers fought on the side of the Confederates, and one of the other great grandfather, fought on the side of the Yankees. And my grandfather kept his mouth shut. He didn't say a word about anything. I never knew that his family was Yankee until I was a grown person.
And you said,
He's
I'm
a
sorry,
smart man.
you said that one side fought on the side of the Confederates and one side fought on the side of
Great grandfathers, yes.
fought on the side of the Union.
Of the Union. Okay,
Wow.
the Union, yeah.
Wow.
That makes a difficult family situation if you're living in Louisiana and you marry into someone who's always been a Southerner.
So your ancestors, our ancestors,
We're split.
fought one another in the Civil War.
Well, not exactly, but their sides were
Yes.
opposite.
Opposite. Yeah. Right.
That's
Wow.
See, I should have asked about that too.
Makes it difficult to explain.
It does, and difficult to find and sort out.
Hey, that's why we're starting now.
Yeah.
That's exactly
Yeah.
right.
Yeah, exactly.
And it sounds like on Grandpa's sides we're just pure-blooded Texans.
No, they weren't.
Not quite.
Do what now, Jacob?
I said it sounds like on your side we're just pure-blooded Texans, but
But they're not.
Well, I don't know for sure. I do not know where my grandparents were born, actually.
No,
Uh,
but you know where the Gibsons came from.
yeah.
Okay.
Mhm. The Gibsons were Scottish.
Well, way back
Okay,
there.
Way back there. Now, I do not know when they came to the United States or where.
It was a
That-
southern state. That's
That
all
just
I know.
wasn't talked about much at that time. And if it was, I was too young to understand it.
Or
And,
we're not interested, maybe. I don't know.
But,
Most kids are not interested in that.
But I just know that they were from around the same area. Grapeland was probably about 25 miles from my mother's place was probably about 25 miles from my dad's place in Palestine. Now 25 miles back that time was a long ways. And they didn't ride into town in cars. They rode wagons.
Yeah, they did have wagons.
They traveled in wagons when they were young. So, and train growing up. So, but
Wow.
no, but not vehicles. Not that early. So,
The next thing, so we covered that decently. Is there anything else?
yeah.
The only thing the next thing that I wanted to ask is he phrased it as what was family like growing up, but I think it's more of like can you describe life as a kid? Like just
Well,
what was daily life like?
you're speaking to an only child, so it's
Mhm.
not it's a little warped here. I didn't have to get along with brothers and sisters. And I'm sure my parents were indulgent. I got accused of that anyway.
Well, more specifically, for example, I remember being spanked growing up, but that's really uncommon nowadays. How was that? What was that like? Did your parents spank you guys? And...
Oh yeah, switch.
Okay.
Yeah, switch.
Well-
Dad liked.
And what can you explain the switch?
Oh, it's a little tiny branch off a tree. That doesn't sound like much unless you've got bare legs down there getting it. Dad used a scoring board when they played dominoes, and you get so many points, and you could put these little matchsticks in those holes. That was his favorite weapon. He didn't use it much.
And what were like the chores like? What did you have to do as a kid?
Not much. I had to feed my pets. If I had them, I had cats. I love cats.
Mm.
and I had a dog. But he didn't have anything. He lived one fence away from a schoolyard.
Grandpa, what was life like growing up?
Okay, growing up, I grew up in the same house. When I graduated from high school, I
Oh, I forgot
lived
that
in the
part.
same place. Mary Jane's growing up was a lot easier in that she grew up in an humble house,
We moved a lot.
and she moved a lot. Humble Oil and Refinery moved people around East Texas quite a bit. In fact, they might only move about 5 miles to another humble camp, depending where they worked. So there were times where humble people that would be transferred from from one humble camp to another, maybe 5-10 miles down the road. And while the man was working that day, the humble had people to come and move them. And when the man went home, he went to the other humble camp. All the houses in the humble camps at that time were the same.
Well,
They were painted white. They had 2 bedrooms and 1 bathroom, a back porch. So, so when the humble people moved them, it was real easy. The furniture went from one room to another room just like it, except a different location.
different
Yeah.
city,
So just
different
same house, just-
community.
Yeah.
we know exactly where this couch is
It's,
gonna go.
right,
Mhm.
and they could
Now,
put the furniture in the
the
right
humble
place.
camps-
Didn't have to ask.
There was an humble camp in Laird Hill, and about 3 miles down the road was another humble camp. And about 10 miles down the road was an humble camp at Turnertown. And then less than that was an humble camp in New London.
Yeah.
So the camps, humble tried to have people working close to their home through their humble camps, and that was real interesting. Now the house I moved to was a real small house. I remember as we grew up, my brother and I, we added a room, which we call a dining room. We made the kitchen a little bit larger. We added a breezeway, and later we added a garage. That house did not look like the same house we moved to in 1942 when I graduated from high school in 1957. But we added to it, and that's the way people did. We lived on a street called Teachers Row. Teachers Row was mostly teachers that lived right next to the school. There was an elementary school, a junior high school, and a high school there on the same campus. And by the way, since it was the oil field, there were several oil wells on that campus.
And they were pumping oil.
And they were
wells.
pumping. They used to, in
Oh, I
fact,
see.
they used to be flowing, but the oil was losing pressure and they went to pumping at times. That school district, the London Independent School District, was said to be one of the richest school districts in the United States, because they actually owned the oil wells, the school district, because that land was given to the school district, and that also they then owned those wells and what was underneath. So, but
You know, my mom wanted me to bring up something, which was that you had a lot of jobs in high school, or at least you worked in high school, and she wanted me to ask you about those.
the high school that working in
As a high school.
As a high schooler. As a high
okay,
schooler.
as a high school. Okay, we were both in high school together. The London Independent School District was a consolidated school district, and let me tell you about 1937. The school district owned, like I already said, they had a lot of money, and they owned a really good, nice junior high and high school. 1937, natural gas did not have an odor. Gas collected under the building on March the 18th. It got to a point where a spark set it off. The junior high school building blew up. killing 312 students and teachers, which was and is, I think to this day, the most tragic event that ever happened to junior high school in the United States. The explosion in 1937 was the reason that now natural gas coming into every house has an odor. There's a chemical added to the natural gas. At that time, natural gas did not have an odor, and it was free. A lot of people in East Texas had free gas because at that time oil was important. People wanted oil out of the ground for different reasons, but they did not have that much use for the gas coming out of the ground, so it was flared. And if it was flared then, if people lived close enough, they could tie in to the lines and have free gas. So that's the story of the London Independent School District's disaster.
And that's commonly referred to the New London School explosion,
Mhm.
right?
New London School explosion. If you remember now, East Texas is still a community area that there are not too many large towns. New London was an oil field town. Almost everybody in the town, in the school district of New London, had somebody that was involved in the explosion. Some people lost 3 children in that one day. It was a real hard thing for those people to get used to. But the building was built back in a little bit over a year. And the building now that's in London School is the same as the building that was built and finished, I think, in 1938. So, if you read the history of the oil field or the history of Texas, you're going to read about the London School explosion.
It sounds like that event made a big impact on the family.
That was a terrible thing to get over. One thing about it, when we graduated, on that day, March 18th, nothing was ever said because that community had trouble getting over losing 312 people. Most of those people are buried there locally. The graves would say 1937, March 18th. So,
Wow.
hard thing.
You know, y'all have taken me and Travis to the New London School, and there's some sort of museum across the street.
Mm-hmm.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure whenever I was in there, I read that there was a letter sent to the local community from world leaders,
Mhm.
including the then leader of Germany. Is that right?
That's true.
So letters of sympathy.
Right. This was a telegram, wasn't it? Wasn't it a telegram that came from Adolf Hitler?
There's a letter there in the museum from Adolf Hitler.
It may not have been a telegram.
Not a letter, I think more of not email either, a telegram. Telegram.
That's amazing. Jumping around a little bit, kind of going along with this is, y'all have lived through some really, impactful American history. For us as a family and for us, as a state, like, Texans, the New London School explosion was notable. But y'all also lived through things like the moon landing and Vietnam and the fall of the USSR. And I wanted to ask y'all about any of those things that were notable to you that you remember. But you can talk about any of them.
Well, this is a little off from where you're going, but I think that was our first full blast encounter with the death of a president, because in 1963, President Jack Kennedy was assassinated, and it just hit, bang. Announcement came over, he's been shot. And then before we went home, we knew he was dead. And it was the most upsetting current event that occurred in my life. Because it was just total gloom. It was worse than the pandemic. It was 4 days of nothing. Waiting, listening, watching.
That was a very difficult thing
Very difficult.
for the school to do. That
It was
happened.
a difficult
I
situation.
can remember how the kids were upset
The kids were and
No.
the teachers were.
that a president had been assassinated in Dallas, here in Texas. Very difficult. And we were in Lamarck at that time. And
And I think too, that's when we saw the connection between current events and history.
Mm-hmm.
And what it would be like 50, 75, whatever years from there. Because that's always remembered. You know, this is the anniversary of the death of John F. Kennedy.
the moon
The only
landings were interesting.
The moon They were
The moon
exciting.
landings are just like something that you can't believe. It's just like this telephone. You can't believe that.
What it
Not
can
if you
do.
were raised back in the 30s and 40s.
Where you had to
and 50s.
crank up the next house.
Because I remember my parents, and I've got their little generator type thing. I can remember my grandparents saying that they used this thing to get the signal over several miles. Okay, I remember growing up, I don't remember when we got a telephone. We didn't have a
Oh, I
telephone
do.
for a good while.
I was 12.
We got a TV when I was in the 10th grade. And I think they'd been out a little bit more before that, but we didn't have a lot of money to buy that TV with. But we had a telephone. The telephone was a dial phone that you'd dial with your hand. If somebody wanted to talk to us, our ring was a long and a short.
And it was a party line.
Yes, the party line meant there were 8 people on our party line. The ring would be a short, or 2 shorts maybe, or a long and a short, or no telling. And so that would ring all 8 families. And if it was a long and a short, you picked it up because it was your house. Okay? Well, the house next door might be on the same party line. If they picked it up, then they could listen to your conversation.
They weren't supposed to, but you know how that is.
Then we went from the dial phone to more sophisticated phones like that right there.
Ooh, we had a lot of steps between.
When I was at Texas A&M, I've told you guys before, I lived in the largest dorm on campus, Walton Hall.
A lot of
There was
floors
one phone in Walton Hall. It was a pay phone in the
in
lobby.
the lobby.
And so you didn't have phones in your room to call anybody. So things have come a long ways. And now people carry these all the time.
In the pocket.
And if you're somewhere, everybody's got these phones. We were in a place last week. I looked around. There were 14 people in the room. There were 14
They
people
all had a
looking
phone
at these
in their
things.
hand.
All 14 people in that room had this in
They
their
were being
hand going
entertained.
through it. Okay?
So, question: how many years after? So you're describing this phone. How many years after, being worried about your neighbors listening to your phone call because you're having to do this by hand, did we land on the moon?
I don't know, Travis.
How many years from the point of a party line phone?
Mm-hmm.
to the date when we landed on the moon, which was, what did we say a while ago? 69?
Mm-hmm.
1969. Okay. That would have been not that many years.
I don't remember,
Seems like it
Travis.
was eons, but I don't
Especially
think it was
people
very long.
that lived out in the country.
Mm-hmm.
I'd say
Okay.
25 years.
25 years we went from cranking a phone to walking.
Putting
On
a
the
foot on the
moon.
moon. Isn't that mind-boggling? Gives me chills.
That's
Think about
why I
it.
asked that. I mean, that's just.
It really, it was total science fiction. You know, you can't imagine that.
And the thing too about phones, Travis, back then,
You can't imagine planning it, developing it, knowing it works.
you could call people in your little area, but if you called another town, you were probably, if it was 3 miles away, you were probably calling long distance.
Well,
So that
Didn't
costs
cost much
money.
to do it, but
Okay.
still.
When she
It's
lived
still
at
a
Laird,
mind-boggling thought.
yeah, when she lived in Laird Hill, that was a long distance call for me, and it was only 9 miles. The Humble Camp in Laird Hill from New London, you know, it made a big difference. And now you can call all over the world,
And
almost
further.
with that thing, you know.
Mm-hmm.
But yes, things, it's remarkable. When we were in Jefferson, Texas, out in the country, the first landing on the moon,
Yes, it was.
we saw
There must have
that
been 50
landing
people
on
in
the
and out
black
of the
and white
house.
TV. You know, and you couldn't believe it. You could not believe at that time that could happen, you know. And that's when NASA here close to Deer Park they were doing most all the work at that time. It's unbelievable. Electronics has really changed. Electronics has changed the world, you know, without a doubt,
Mm-hmm.
and computers. So
And then what about things like the fall of the USSR? What were things like then? And then even more recently, 9/11, because even for
9/11
me,
was still, it was another one of those, this is a really world-shattering experience here. It was the day after 2 days after Chloe was born. And Greg had gone to pick up the baby and Kyle from the hospital, and we were keeping Savannah. Where was Garrett? Was he in preschool? I guess he was. But, you know, I was literally glued to that. I don't know if you remember that little 5-inch TV that used to sit on the cabinet.
I do.
Little bitty thing. It's hard to describe it because you know history is being made right then, that minute. It's kind of.
Travis, that's kind of like things like that. Not believing it could happen was like other day I saw on the TV one of the rockets now came back and landed.
All by itself.
Okay, not only did it go up and go, it came back and landed. How could a rocket do that?
Not a person
You
on it.
know? Who knows? It's
Mm-hmm.
unreal.
And then just because I'm personally interested, what was the reaction to the fall of the USSR?
Well, I think it's about time, you know, here. It's about time you took it down. You know, because that was terrible. And I'd read a lot of books and novels set in that particular situation with giving you the background of the people being cooped up inside and couldn't leave. It was awful. It was just really awful. So I was very glad to see it go down.
Now, if you back up too in history, in World War II. Now, World War II, we were really too young to know a lot about it,
We were not
to remember.
socially aware of the historical importance
But
of that.
people, if you look back now, the way people had to donate stuff, donated iron to the cause, donated rubber
Rubber
to
tires.
the cause, It was hard to get gasoline
Yeah.
during World War II.
It was hard to get sugar.
In fact, I had a cousin in Palestine. I was telling you guys the other day. There were Thurman Gibson was his name. Thurman Earl Gibson. He was a senior. The principal called Thurman Earl Gibson and 4 other boys to his office. And they went in, and of course they had to say, "I'm not guilty. I didn't do anything." And
It wasn't
you know,
me.
that's what I saw when I was assistant principal. No one came in my office that was guilty. I didn't do it. I'm not guilty. Well, these 5 guys came in and they were saying this. The principal said, "No, guys, that's not it. I've got good news and bad news for you." And they wanted to know, "What do you want first?" He said, Thurman Earl said, "Well, I'd like to really have the good news." Well, the good news, guys, is you're going to be able to complete your senior year. You can graduate in May. And they all smiled. The next statement, what's the bad news then? The bad news is as soon as you graduate, you're going to Tyler, which was about 30 miles away, and register for the draft. And they were drafted. And as soon as school was out in May, all 5 of them reported to Tyler to see if they made the draft. That's when there was a draft for the military. You had no choice. You went. You went. And so Thurman went, and he went to the East Coast, and he said he got there, and there's this big old ship. Big ship.
This was after his training, yeah.
And he said, this was after his training, and he said, I had never seen a big ship like that. He said, I had never seen the ocean.
I think it
Oh
was
my
the Queen
gosh.
Mary. No, yeah, he was.
And it was a cruise ship converted
It was the Queen
to
Mary.
a carrier of soldiers.
You said there were 10 boats
Yeah.
straight up.
And he said down in the hull of this big ship were chains with beds. There were 10 beds down.
And approximately what year was this? Just
He
I
graduated.
don't know what year he graduated. He told us.
He graduated, I think, in the early 40s. I'm not sure.
But
But while
We've
he was
talked
in
to
the
Aggies
service,
that were in
he
the
was
same
on the beach
position.
in one of the islands, and he's got a helmet, or had a helmet. It's got a bullet through it that he had on his head, propped up. A sniper,
the sniper almost got him.
Japanese sniper.
They were shooting at this helmet.
And
They
he
thought
said
his
if
head
he
was
hadn't
up
had
there.
his helmet propped up, it would have hit his head. It went through his helmet, you know. So, but anyway, that's those guys. As soon as they got out of high school, they went to training, and I think they were trained in Paris, Texas, because there was a base there. I'm
Well,
not sure,
he wound up in Europe.
but and he rounded
And
up.
he was under General George Patton.
George Patton was his general, and
He's
And
got a
during
lot
the
of
war.
good stories. And sometimes you can't tell if it's telling the truth or not. It's got a
One
lot of
story
crap on
was-
it.
one story was during the service, he said, I rode Jezebel. I asked him, what do you mean Jezebel? Who's Jezebel? He said, Jezebel was my horse. I was
didn't
was
ride
in
a
the
horse
cavalry.
in World War II.
I said,
Cavalry
Thurman, they
was
didn't have a
gone.
cavalry during
He said,
World
I'll
War
show
II.
you.
He said,
Pulled
I
out
was
his
in the area where we had a lot of mountains.
and a
And they
lot of
asked
snow.
one day, how many of you guys can ride a horse? I stuck up my hand, he said. Well, what he did is they patrolled the mountains on the
Where
horses.
The snow was too deep for big jeeps, so they
So,
put them on horses.
He said, I was in the cavalry, but our assignment was to patrol
Patrol
the
the
mountains
border.
because it was too far to walk. He said,
and the Jeeps wouldn't make it.
And if you'll clarify for me, this is someone that is a family friend or
He's a cousin.
My cousin, first cousin, born
He's the
and
first
raised
one
in
of the whole
Palestine,
family.
Texas.
First cousin in the family.
Never left home except for World War II.
And he was stationed in Europe
Yes.
for his only
A
time that he
Texas
ever
boy.
left home.
the big ship
Yeah.
left. He said, I was sick the
He came
whole
in-
time going across the
I
ocean.
think he.
We landed in England.
I thought he landed in France, but I guess I didn't get it right.
Well, they left. He said, okay, you may be right, but they left from England.
They did.
If he
leave
didn't
from
participate in D-Day, I would assume that he landed in France.
He did.
He
Le
didn't.
Havre.
He didn't.
I
He
thought it was
didn't.
Le Havre.
He didn't make D-Day. They were behind the group
Yeah,
in
he was,
D-Day.
he was behind the first day of.
But he
first
said he
World
was
War.
sick the whole time
Yeah, that is a bad
till
part.
they landed. Then
He
they
threw
got
up
back
every
on
day for 20
the
days.
battleships and went to France.
They put him in the hospital when he got there. They did.
Yeah, he was sick, and when he got to France, he stayed in the hospital. What, 6 weeks?
I don't know how many
He,
weeks.
he
but
was
not
dehydrated
good.
and really sick before he got on. But he was in France when they put him in the hospital.
Oh my gosh. Give me just 1 second. Let's see.